Okay, welcome back. I see a lot of you are still here. Well done. Very good. So am I. Okay. This beautiful picture is Silicon Valley. Who would like to go and live there? It looks very appetizing, doesn't it? A large sprawl, plenty of fog, yeah, large roads. Some of the most extreme divisions of wealth in the world. Billionaires, millionaires, living next to people who have nothing. Interesting, a paradigm, or maybe not, for the way the world is changing. One of my own mentors over the last 30 years is a guy called Terry Eilert, who's a very, very bright journalist and teacher. He was a senior editor at Variety for many years, and he hired me when the Film Business Academy was set up in the UK at City University, part of London University, which is where I did my PhD. Terry taught me these words. Terry said, you've got to remember, Angus, that whilst everyone talks about content is king, reach is queen. And this, as a chess player, had a big impact on me, but also had a big impact on me on this notion that for many years, decades, a lot of European filmmakers in particular, I'm talking about feature filmmakers, were supported by a large amount of subsidy, public broadcasters, a certain amount of tax shelters and rebates, and often, when I started my career in the 1990s, never actually thought about the audience. They were never asked who they were going to reach. They were given, if you like, the drugs of subsidy to be able to feed off without necessarily knowing who they were making content for. When I asked filmmakers in the 1990s, when I did a big research trip all the way from the UK to Venice in an old MG car, and then back over to Munich, and then up to Berlin, and then across to Paris, and then into Dinard for the film festival between the British and the French. This was all done in 92, 93. Most of the auteurs, writer-directors I spoke to, said, yeah, but the producer is just someone who's there to raise the money. Or some of them said, the producer's just there to give me a schedule. He's a line producer. We don't need them anymore, for anything else. And do you know what's really interesting? How that position and that perception has changed in Europe for the better. That directors, writer-directors have become much more in harness with their producers, and producers have become much more respectful on the whole of the director's role, and that the triangle of the writer, producer, director has been vital. So in terms of content, Europe has moved quite a long way from just being subsidy junkies, and this idea of harnessing the creative team between the producer, writer, director has been a very important move in the right direction. And it's had an impact on reach up until those streamers started to pick up speed. Because, of course, what we're dealing with is not just a disrupted model, but a complete world change of how everyone around the world finds and imbibes and experiences films, television, animation, feature documentaries, live factual programming, etc., etc. It's a big change. Reach, of course, we're told has been globalized, that anyone can see anything anywhere now. And to some extent, the extraordinary thing about these devices is that is largely true. But it also provides us with a lot of choices. And the question when we talk about reach, which of course on one level has technically through the internet and digital technology been expanded, whether or not actually the question to ask is whether our choices are now more limited. What do I mean by that? Let's imagine we dial back to Netflix 25 years ago. Netflix was a send it in the post operation. It amassed over time a huge library of DVDs, which Reed Hastings had checked whether or not it worked in terms of postal systems in the US by putting actually a CD disc and posting it back to himself to see how long it took and how cheap it was. And gradually, Netflix, over a long period of time, back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, amassed a library of more than 100,000 titles. 100,000 titles of anything from A-list, Oscar-winning movies, to B-list, horror, genre. No porn. That was somewhere else in the valley. Yeah, a different valley. Not the valley of death, but another valley. Yeah, we won't go there. But what was really interesting is there was genuine choice. Yeah, there was a huge amount of choice. And you could find pretty much anything on Netflix by around the mid-2000s, yeah, towards the late 2000s, before Netflix started to do its own shows, its own programming, and of course, it gradually became the different kind of monster in need of a feed that we know now. Do you know that Switzerland is the most lucky territory in Europe today because it has more choice on Netflix than any other territory? I think you have a choice of 15,000 titles in Switzerland. Most of us have a lot less, somewhere between 3, 4, 5, 7,000 titles. Weren't we told that it was great because the internet and digital technology gave us much more choice? How many times do you find when you're a Netflix subscriber that things are dropping off Netflix? And in fact, you might have missed it, but it's going. Oh, we're just warning you that this is no longer on our platform. But we were told that shelf life, digitally, was forever. And that Blockbuster stores, which gave us, you remember those old clunky VHSs for people of my age and slightly younger? Oh, well, there's no choice because, there's only so much shelf space that we can actually stock these films and give you that choice. Digital was supposed to be endless, and yet somehow it isn't. So reach is an interesting question, isn't it? Reach for who, and who decides what we can reach, or what can we push? This is a big question that doesn't get debated. This comes from research that I did for a big Variety article about 18 months ago. I'm sure the numbers have probably changed since then, but it's a really interesting question, isn't it? Why are we actually having less choice rather than more choice? Because the masters of the universe, in terms of platforms, are curating in a different manner. And they're curating mostly with algorithms. Enter the age of what I call the algo. Yeah, like an al guy. Yep. So this session is where is data and technology driving us? Are we heading towards nirvana? What a lovely place to be. Or are we, as I did earlier in my career when I was in such a hurry, driving into a brick wall? Quite extreme, but we are not at the moment necessarily somewhere in the middle. We're closer to a brick wall, by my view and critical analysis, than we are nearer nirvana. Okay, so what exactly is an algorithm? I didn't know what an algorithm was for many years. I had no idea. I didn't even know what an algorithm really was when I read The Fear Index, Robert Harris's very good novel, back in 2010-11. I didn't really understand what it was. So what do? They encompass a step-by-step set of instructions. They tell a computer exactly how to complete a task or solve a problem. In fact, they're human-originated at the moment, or most of them are. Not all, as I said this morning. They apply fixed, deterministic rules that always follow the same process when given the same input, a bit like a recipe that produces consistent results. They're the building blocks that make some of now AI and Gen AI possible, but unlike AI, algorithms don't normally learn or adapt on their own without human reprogramming. Now that is beginning to change. We now have AI systems that are beginning to change the algorithms based on their own data collection and scraping. So, Guillaume, the executive director of the Marché du Film at Cannes, gave me this quote, very interesting quote, which is this question about not just the technology that's been driving distribution for the last, say, 20 years, but his idea of distribution being actually a threat. The biggest threat from AI is the distribution. It's about how you get to top of mind. When you have that much choice, you don't. You end up picking something you don't even want to watch. How many of us in this room have sat at Christmas and someone's come up with the bright idea saying, let's all watch something on Netflix? 45 minutes later, after quite a lot of argument and disagreement, the grandparents have fallen asleep. Some of the kids and teenagers are now playing video games in their bedrooms, and you're left thinking, that was a bad idea. Isn't it interesting how programming has become narrower and narrower according to what they think, as a platform or a service provider or as a broadcaster, what they think we want to watch. And of course, we watch quite often alone, whether it's on that laptop, on a phone. And don't you remember we were told we'd never watch anything on a phone? It'd be terrible for the industry. It'd be awful. It would take everything down huge notches in terms of quality. And yet you sit on trains and you see lots and lots of people watching all sorts of different types of things on a phone. Yeah? Interesting. But this idea of ending up picking something you didn't even watch, especially when you're in a group trying to get people around that campfire, which used to be the TV set where everyone would congregate at a certain time when the schedule said X or Y is on, is not the case. It's now very, very singular, narrow casting and targeted in terms of how we are pre-selected, and we are told that you have watched X, Y, and Z, therefore we think that you will like A, B, C. Now, some people obviously do that and say, I'll make my own choices. I'm probably one of those who goes, oh, please, give us a break. I really don't want more of the same. But it is interesting, this narrow casting. Legacy players, networks in America, broadcasters, public and private, cable channels, which are of course all suffering from being cord cut, yeah? They, what we call often linear TV, and even the pay stations and physical media have lost a considerable amount of business and eyeballs and traction. We're told that linear TV is over. That's not actually quite true. There's still a considerable amount of appetite for public broadcasting if it isn't snuffled and murdered by the powers that be, as we've seen PBS get murdered in North America, or I should say US, to be fair to the Canadians. They've already got their own colonial issues with Trump. Yeah. Yeah. So they're doubling down, obviously all of them, on streaming, and those letters I've written there are very important. Long-term customer value. How do they capture you and keep you there? How do they get your credit card details? And I'm sure we're all guilty of this, of signing up for something and then forgetting that we signed up and find that we're paying for far longer than we ever actually wanted the service. I am guilty of that, absolutely. I did a clean out the other day and saved myself about £300 a month. More fool me, yeah? But they're relying on getting your data, getting your pay data, and keeping you there. Of course, they also have the other challenge of making sure new people come along and sign up to trap you in that little monkey cage. Do you remember those monkey traps where you put your hand in the monkey and it tries to grab the nuts and it takes a big handful, but the cage is designed so that the hand can't come out when you want the monkey nuts to be able to eat? Exactly the same image that I'm thinking here. What they do need, of course, is fan engagement. So a lot of that is being driven by anti-social media. Exactly. And of course, what is interesting is people are looking for immersive experiences. So on the one hand, I talked about authenticity this morning, but we're also talking about how we build people's attention, capture and build people's attention. This is the fight. And all of this activity is being driven both by data and algorithms. Yeah? So, we do live, definitely, in an attention economy. Those who shout loudest, yeah, get heard more often. Those who go to the top of the charts get more exposure. So there's a self-refuting element going on here, which of course is being channeled and prototyped and pushed through this digital algorithmic drive, yeah? That attention is not just being driven by AI tools in the form of multi-layered algorithms, But actually, let's just think about it. There are 8 billion people in the world, surrounded now by 800 billion bots. Yeah, I was a bit shocked when I found that stat. Whoa, and that's today, 800 billion AI bots. And we know that of those 8 billion people, as I said this morning, around 1 billion people are engaging actively in a regular manner with AI tools. Okay? So this is on. This is not just creeping up. This is today, now. Yeah? So let's just look at the film and TV life cycle a little bit in terms of intellectual property. In fact, I was asked at the break about attitudes to ideas, IP, copyright, creation, by the director who called me out for talking about 12 months of their time when they make a film, quite rightly. It's a very good point, because in fact, this obsession with IP is not quite the same as what I was talking about this morning when I was talking about ideas. They're one source of ideas. Lots of different types of IP can be sources of ideas. But this proof of concept push model is really worth investigating a little bit more carefully. Yeah? So you might start with a book, or creative goods, or a product that's already been tested. It might be a story that's been published online. It might be a book. It might be a theatre play. It might be a radio show, whatever it is. Or it might, of course, be a video game. One of the shocking things from the Anklers results last night that I read this morning was the fact that actually AI algorithms that drive and monitor people's searches today think that video games are going to be a huge driver, bless you, of films tomorrow. It's betting on The Last of Us being tomorrow. Interesting. Yeah. So it's taking very narrow data from different points and promoting that data without necessarily applying common sense or objectivity, etc., etc. What a proof of concept, of course, in terms of a push model is trying to do is to say to a commissioner or a platform or anyone who's parting with their time and money in terms of financing that there is a proven audience and a proven appetite for this good, this film, this show, or whatever it is. And they're saying, look at all the market research and the data, look at what the algorithms are throwing off, look at what I can do with my AI research. And of course, a lot of those data drives are highly personalized. They dig quite deep into where our footprints have been. Yeah? Brands and franchises appear safer and can be scaled because there's plenty of data on those things which are recurring and have already gone before. My last point's the big one. Original ideas, really, truly original ideas that come out of a writer or a filmmaker, and they are truly, genuinely new. Oh no, there's no proof. Oh no, we can't. We're not really into anything that's original. Well, we call ourselves original, but what we want is to see proof of concept. What's it based on? Where's the IP? These are the kind of questions I get asked all the time as an executive producer. Angus, can you show us that there's already a proven demand for this? But your writer's really young and unproven and new. How could we possibly develop that when it might be just developed into a vacuum? These are the challenges that a lot of filmmakers, storytellers are facing under this tyranny of the algo. Yeah? Not just original ideas are deemed more risky and dangerous, but when you start to lock that together with the point that I made this morning about the youth, the new storytellers of tomorrow, and we get into a fix of what will come next if that lot is locked out. Yeah? That's a problem. I think that algorithms, under the evidence of all the research and the work that I've done, have given rise to a massive information disorder, actually. Okay? Algorithms have learned, through search recommendations and social media, clickbait, how to amplify all our unhealthy biases. My friend Dekai, who talks about bringing up and raising AI as if it was our children, and how we're failing as parents. look at that again, have learned through search recommendations and social media clickbait how to amplify our unhealthy biases. I'm not just talking about adults here. I'm not talking about us lot. I'm talking about children. Children who sit glued in small prams on an iPad or some screen, and it's called the screen generation, who on the algorithm off Insta or YouTube or whatever are on a roll, a feed that they don't want to get off. And parents understand, as I have 4 boys who are all now teenagers and in their 20s, when they were young, you often thought, Jesus, what are we going to do to keep them happy? Well, the one thing I didn't do was sit them in front of iPads. Yeah? I didn't necessarily give them Tolstoy either, okay? I'm not quite as nerdy as that. But you get my point. We have all seen that awful image. We've also seen that image of young adults sitting in a restaurant who are supposed to be on a date, looking at their phones like this, not even talking to each other. Sorry if that offends some of you, but whatever. You'll have time to get over it. There's a trap. User choices are becoming governed by an ever-tightening web of computer programs and data mining. This is what we call the flat homogenizing effect. And the New Yorker writer, Kyle Chakya, fantastic book called Filter World, argues that the difference is not good for algorithms, that more of the same or similar works much better for data recommendations. Remember what I said right at the beginning? Pattern recognition. Yeah? Reinforced patterns. Yeah? Anything that's different or outlier gets discounted because we want something that is smooth. This is what I mean about the way they're trained and the way they're programmed and what we're actually getting as a result. Yeah? It's the lowest common denominator. It's a race to the bottom. Yeah? It's being promoted at the expense of complex, diverse, or challenging stories, or as I said, the fresh and new. A flat world. Worse than an expensive flat white. Yeah. So, the flatness and pre-selection of viewers' choices and addictive subconscious trap AI-driven recommendations and filter provide are everywhere. Managers love it because their commitment is to shareability over creative risk. They want people joining and talking about Netflix, and they want to trap you there. They don't necessarily want to take high risk. Yeah? They're not necessarily keen on innovation when something definitely just feeds their demand of stayability, long-term customer value, and every now and again a water cooler moment like adolescence, which, by the way, they didn't really see coming. What do I mean by flatness? What does Chakya mean by it? It's a reduction into simplicity, the least ambiguous, the least disruptive. In fact, and this is the important bit, least meaningful pieces of culture are promoted the most. That's a problem. That's a serious problem for all of us who are storytellers. Yeah? Customized content, not discovered, experienced, or enriched. Films are simply examples that are valued or not as part of a wider branded media diet. Yeah? The tricky thing is, and this is a very interesting quote from Mike Gubbins, a very senior consultant, very experienced colleague, stroke, peer of mine, audiences are fickle. They don't know what they want until they see it. We forget that, and we also forget that there's a twirling demand. When I talk about generations and I talk about different types of younger and older viewers, for a period they remain that, but they all grow, and we all shift, don't we? Because we're all changing age, whether it's by days, by months, by years. Yeah, well, of course we engage with different things according to our demographics, our culture, our history, our learning, our education, but they also change because of our experience as we grow older. It is a twirling demand. It doesn't stay still. Yeah? It isn't flat. We are not flat. But we're being provided flat. Yeah? We are fickle. We like to be surprised. Do you remember that wonderful line at the end of Ratatouille when Peter O'Toole, Anton Ego, says to the little rat, and the rat is saying, well, what shall I cook you? He says, surprise me. Yeah, that's what we want. Surprise. Yeah? I talked about the 80-20 model at Netflix. Interesting, when I was in Edinburgh at an academic conference at the business school last summer, the academics who do serious research on this laughed and said, no, it's even higher than 80%. They said, you can't trust anything Netflix tells us. These are high-level academics from Yale, Stanford, Berkeley, Edinburgh, London, Cambridge, etc. Of course, the data is mined because they want to guess what they think we'd like to see next. So, of course, when you're on your Netflix, and how many of you are on Netflix? Yeah, quite a lot. About 70% of you. You have your own page on Netflix. Your own page, your own top 10s, other than the things that they pretend are the big ones that are big that week, and we can't tell now because they're not actually sharing any of their real data anyway. And you have your own pages and your own recommendations because they know what you've seen before. So your top 10 and what's recommended is different to my wife's, or my son's, or your girlfriend's. Yeah? It's pushing what they think you want. Yeah? You want. And they know that you're going to see it on your own screens mostly because you won't be at that campfire where everyone is at Christmas disagreeing about what to watch. Yeah? We've all been there. Yeah, exactly. See, individual pages are designed via our footprints. And it uses the Netflix doppelganger, a member who binges on The Queen's Gambit, but also watches The Witcher, and views Attenborough's documentaries. Netflix reviews those programs that your doppelganger has watched, while a similar viewer has not got to them yet, and recommends them to that primary subscriber, whether it's Yoichi in Tokyo or Samantha in Cape Town. It's pretty complex, because it gets really, really complex when all these recommendations start spinning, as David Cossey, one of the former international executives, told me when I interviewed him about a year and a half ago after he left Netflix. He said, it gets really complicated. And by the way, everyone who works at Netflix gets sent on a Netflix boot camp to learn this shit. Yeah? They don't take it for granted that you're going to know what they do. Their own staff are drilled in it. You are indoctrinated. Yeah? Whoops. I think I just hit my mic out. No, we're all right. Yeah. Oh, yes, and we love a little bit of Christmas, don't we? Who can tell me what I'm about to get into here? Yes, please do. Do share. Absolutely. Coca-Cola's Christmas ad. Now, last year, they had a Gen AI generated one that lots and lots of people wrote in and said how disgusted and offended they were because it was using AI in the wrong way. And this year, you've had a huge amount of people coming back saying it's awful, it's terrible use of Gen AI. Big hoopla. Did Coke care? Not a bit of it. All publicity is good publicity as far as they're concerned. What is interesting, though, the bubble man himself, Jeff Bezos, decided that the Christmas advert that Amazon used 7 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, was good enough for this year and didn't spend any more money on it. So this obsession that we have around this sort of cult of what draws our attention isn't necessarily always particularly revealing, yeah, or profitable. What I have noticed, and it'd be really interesting to ask you guys about this, when I was younger, in the 1990s, I used to have a TV screen which had hundreds of different channels to choose from. All sorts of cable rubbish. It did have BBC One, BBC Two, and BBC Three, and ITV, and then a bunch of other sort of different things, you know. But it also had all sorts of cable stuff, and then it had, you know, home shopping, you know, networks, etc. All that stuff. Huge amounts of stuff on it. It was like a huge sort of omni-channel, but badly organized. What I'm seeing now is Back to the Future. What we're seeing is streaming looking a bit like old telly. We're getting, if you like, a page that comes on our smart TV screen, and it has your ability to get to Netflix and Disney if you subscribe, and X and Y, and it's all there in front of you, quite neatly done, and you can pretty much find what you want. Now, these companies are all obsessed with their brand, yeah, but actually what we want is a show we think we're going to like, or a show that we've heard of. Word of mouth, word of click is still very important, yeah, despite the algorithms that I'm talking about. That's what really really drives us, although we're going about it at the moment by doing research online and using AI to be able to find out about shows, and it's slightly misdirecting us or pushing other models away. But what I am saying is that we're going to see this more and more, that over the next 2 or 3 years, you'll go back and think, yeah, what was Angus talking about? Oh, yeah, omni-channels, everything being on one page for simplicity, and the main brands dominating that one page. That is what you're going to see increasingly, okay? So, something for all of you directors, writers, producers, and funders. This, to me, is one of the best things I think someone told me about algorithms. Todd Brown's a very, very experienced senior executive. He's run XYZ with 3 other partners for many years. He's very clever. He also is involved in international film sales and financing. You cannot chase the algorithm. By the time you catch up and deliver a film or show, the algorithm has changed. Well, go figure. Of course it has. Data is changing very, very quickly. Audiences are fickle. Despite the fact that there's a huge amount of data, the notion that Netflix can say this is exactly what we want now and commission it does not mean once the show is made, because let's remember, a film, but most importantly, high-end television, takes months and months to deliver. So there's no way around it. The algorithms are going to be off. And in fact, the most frustrating thing for all of us in this room and all those other writers, directors, and producers who think that they need to have to commission and get commissioned and pitch and use an algorithm to be able to kind of say, look, we think that we know what you want, will find that Netflix will say, yeah, that's what we're looking for. You get back in touch with them with the pitch 2 months later, they're like, oh no, we've changed, we're not interested in that anymore. I mean, it's sending people mad. It's sending people like, oh my God, did I hear them 2 months ago? They said that they wanted X, but now they want Y. So this is bullshit. All of this is misdirection. This isn't helpful to any serious writers, producers, directors, filmmakers. You can't chase the algorithm. Go figure. Just do the maths. It's so clear, and yet we're propagated around, well, this is what we're looking for at the moment. No accountability, no responsibility, data that will automatically go out of date by the time they've gone to sleep. So you can imagine what it means when you're actually at the point of trying to perfect a script, going through many drafts, trying to get a Bible together for a TV show, let alone actually getting into production. No one says, is this a good idea? Barry Diller, the former head of Fox, and also, as an aside, one of the originators of the home shopping channel, one of his less altruistic moments, was very interesting recently because he gave a wonderful podcast where he said, I am sick and tired of the slicing and dicing of content being commissioned, programmed, and chosen by algorithms. It is like dying death by 1,000 cuts. Has anyone actually thought to say, is this a good idea? Very simple. This is from someone who was called in Hollywood for many years Killer Diller. Yeah? But he's got a very good point, hasn't he? Is it a good idea? What do we feel about the idea? Not what does the data or the pretense of data tell us about this. Yeah? Very interesting. So, we actually live, and have lived for more than 100 years, in an industry, especially in film, which has been driven by curation, selection, yeah? Programming chosen by people with a view of what they think might be important or good to share or of value, yeah? And in fact, the film industry is an enormous curation machine. So is the TV industry, if you think about it, even though it's more industrial, yeah? We have mainstream awards. The awards season, we have a whole season running from about September or October onwards through to sort of March. Everyone gets terribly excited about a few titles that get nominated and some that win, yeah? I'm not just talking about the Oscars. I'm talking about BAFTA, talking about all sorts of things, yeah? Festivals in themselves. Many of the festivals, especially A-list festivals, are competitive. And you are invited to be at a festival Even that very word, invitation, means that someone has selected you. They have picked you out of probably hundreds or thousands of films. Yeah? Funding filters, all sorts of types of filters are put up around funding, whether it's on the commercial private side or whether it's on the public side. Does your face fit? Does it fit our model? Are these the kind of values we want? Have you got talent that we want to back? Et cetera, et cetera. And of course, this all means that there's a lot of gatekeepers around, yeah? Not just film and TV talent agents, but gatekeepers in terms of decision makers, yeah? And last and very least, critics, because everyone has become a critic now, and everyone can put their views up on the internet anyway. Critics are probably the last bastion of judgment from a viewpoint of genuine knowledge, yeah? I'm not poo-pooing critics. I have also done some film criticism in my career, but it's interesting. Again, this is part of the curation machine. What is interesting is, of course, it's not just critics, it's also programmers and their notes. If you actually spend some proper time at a very decent film festival like Berlin and you read the programmers' notes on the films, that's really interesting because they know what they're talking about. And you can at least see what they have to say about the content that they have chosen for us. Yeah? So my point is that there's an enormous amount of curation about taste, selection, promotion, before an audience has any access to it at all. Yeah? There's a lot of filtering already going on in the human world, not just the data algorithms that I've just been talking about. The key difference is it's curated rather than organized. Organized also means commodified, sliced and diced and packaged and repackaged for our convenience, rather than necessary for our nourishment. Yeah? Common sense and taste. So when I spoke to Tom Quinn, who I had the pleasure many years ago of sitting in the Hyatt Hotel in Toronto the day that 9/11 crashed, 2 towers went down in front of us on enormous screens. I've known him a long time, and he's now one of the top pickers, selectors of films. He's managed to pre-buy a lot of the Palme d'Or winners in the last 6 years and a lot of Academy Awards. He is a curator. We serve the movie first, says Tom, dedicated to curating the best cinema in the world and sit precisely on the opposite side of the algorithmic-driven industry. There's another one here from Jake Garriott, which I think is a really interesting viewpoint, and this is very much to the heart of what I'm trying to explain. There are 2 types of streaming services. Those that are aimed at customers who follow their own behavior model and are promoted more of what they already watch, and those that try to leverage their knowledge and expertise to help people navigate films. Who here is a member of Mubi? Okay, interesting. And Criterion Channel? Really specialist. Nah, interesting. Okay. Who else is a member of a platform, a subscriber, or go to a platform that you would see as highly curated in the way that I'm talking about it? I haven't mentioned Mubi or Criteria. Yes? Do share? Dropout. Okay. Yep. Animation Showcase. Interesting. Okay. And you'd say that that was a very curated offer. Curated as in a lot of the content has been carefully selected. It's not just giving you more of what it thinks you want. No. Okay. That passes the definition. Good. All right. Mubi is actually a serious player. It's just raised 100 million. Obviously got in some trouble because apparently it was somewhat connected to some kind of Israeli contact. It's a hedge fund or a VC that had also had strong links to Israel. There's a lot of backwards and forwards in the press about values, etc. But nevertheless, what is interesting is Mubi also owns one of the top sales companies in the world, in Europe, Match Factory. Match Factory is a serious player, very, very interesting curator of world cinema. Not just foreign language, which, as I said, is a ghetto, but it's very important. What is interesting is that when I last spoke to Shudder, which is a very successful streaming platform, which does not only horror, but psychological thrillers and something I had never heard of, adjacent horror. What the hell is adjacent horror? I said to Emily Gotto, what is adjacent horror? Well, it's kind of horror, but it's sort of not quite sort of, really hardcore. And I'm like, okay, adjacent, okay. Near horror, okay. What is interesting is that they have never used an algorithm in their life, and they curate the entire platform through taste and selection and invitation. And they're particularly hot on new talent. So when we talk about these different models, it is not one size fits all. It isn't all algo-driven. Some of the most interesting, quite commercial channels or genre-driven channels are also using curation to good effect and not excluding, therefore, the generation of tomorrow or genuinely diverse, and we use that word very, very broadly when it comes to social politics. They're effectively promoting genuine diversity. Yeah? So, what's this going to look like, this new landscape? I am not a large language model. As I pointed out, I'm a very small language model. But my prediction, for what it's worth, is I think the streaming market is going to be dominated by 2 or 3 major standalone video on-demand players, okay, per national market, and then there will be the global aggregators. Yeah? Apple, Disney+, etc., Netflix. But of course, we're already seeing some conglomeration there with the fact that Warner Brothers is up for sale, and that Netflix might buy Warner Brothers, or Paramount might buy Warner Brothers, and now, as I pointed out, we've gone from 5 to 4, etc. Yeah? But this business about the 2 or 3 standalone SVOD players in each key market is very important. That still allows for a certain amount of taste and diversity if they're not all following the same algos, if some of them take on a level of curation. Yeah? That's important. So interesting on the smaller providers, 50% of the subs came via aggregators and 25% for larger platforms in 24. But there is a centralizing shift here, okay? What they're trying to do is to bundle and have that omni-channel to stop churn. Churn is deadly. Churn is the thing that Netflix and Disney+, etc., all hate. When you lock in and pay a subscription for a month or 2 to watch X show, because you really like it and you've heard about it and you want to see it, and then you lop off your subscription because you are paying attention to your credit card bill, unlike me, and there you go. You think, great, I've only paid $20 and I managed to see the whole of the 73 episodes of Game of Thrones again, or whatever it is. Yeah? Interesting. So this omni-channel notion and the way that the world is beginning to take place here is one to try to, again, funnel us to that long-term customer value and trying to reduce churn. Bundling concentrates audiences for targeting and ads and datas. And do you remember that point about ads? Do you remember Netflix saying that our biggest competitor is sleep? And in the same breath, he said, Netflix will never take advertising. 24 months later, Netflix had to pivot in April 2022, nearly went bankrupt, didn't actually, managed to survive. Sure enough, what did it do? Clamped down on password sharing, introduced advertising. Never believe them, never. Watch their lips, work it out, yeah? There's a case study I wrote for Cambridge on the Netflix pivot, which, by the way, a pivot is an interesting word. A pivot in Silicon Valley is known as a near-death experience. Dream on, huh? They stayed alive. So, what's interesting here is instead of exclusivity amongst all these platforms, it's about co-visibility, yeah? Exclusivity of ownership and control of IP, which was historically deemed critical, is no longer. It's just basically trying to make sure that you've got the traffic and the attention, yeah? And therefore capturing some of those subscribers, which I think, going back to the director's very good point at lunch about IP, yeah, and the respect for the story, respect for the written word, some of these traits and trends, if you like, are moving us away from that notion, again, of the importance of the power of the story and the voice, someone's voice. When you talk at public funds about new filmmakers, we often hear, and we talk about someone who's got they've got something to say. They've got a point of view. They have a voice. They have a tone. They bring a sensibility to a story. Yeah? I don't hear people talking about that nearly enough now. I don't hear younger people talking about the importance of their writing. Yeah? People are also in a hurry. There's a sense of entitlement and expectation. Short films used to be a very important calling card, part of the muscle building of being able to understand and learn through the process of trying to tell a story, even if it's in a short form. There's a lot of learning that comes with that. There's the expectations of tomorrow's youth is one of, I want it now. Me too. I want to be able to make. Yeah? Which leads us quickly to the notion, of course, what the five horsemen of the apocalypse are saying, is that we've democratized creativity. Everyone can do it now. And let's just push that with algorithms into a digital abyss. But we can make money from it. Yeah? Exactly. So diverse portfolios mean recalibrating production costs more efficiently, controlled expenditure in an uncertain world, and a difficult business model. So what's going on here is the powers that be are trying to work out what is the best bet of forms of content, which is why you'll notice there's been so many reams written and lots of noise made about live sports programming on some of the major streaming platforms, including worldwide wrestling. How many of you are into wrestling? Oh, interesting. Tell us about your addiction to wrestling. No, I'm kidding. Very brave to put your hand up. Well done. Yeah, I won't arm wrestle with you later. Yeah. What I'm getting at here, interestingly, is they're trying very, very hard to bring down expenditure and cost. And let me put that, just for you all in the room, into context. If you were all in a film financing masterclass, one of the things that a lot of filmmakers are not aware of is what it's like to do a deal with Netflix. Yeah. What's really interesting is instead of Netflix saying, it's a green light, go, Netflix gives you a piece of paper. That piece of paper says, we will fund X amount, and our first tranche of actual cash flowing is on delivery of the content. And you go, okay, so it's 100% on delivery, right? 20% on delivery. And then 6 months later, another 20%. And then another 12 months later, another maybe 40%. And then in about 2 years' time, another 10%, and another 24 to 48 months, the rest. I have talked to sales companies, producers, financiers, banks about the problem. The point is that Netflix wants to be able to have the joy of content flow without paying up front and on its balance sheet for the cost. The production pays for the cost of all that money being borrowed from Coots or a financier. Okay, so the producer is immediately now under pressure to borrow against the Netflix contract to turn that into cash. And you realize now the pressure that program makers are under this model of programmers, streamers, wanting basically to have a lunch, but have someone else to pay for the cash flow and the costs of it. They are apparently too big to fail, that great word that we all heard, of course, back in 2008, when Masters of the Universe blew up the financial system. Yeah? Too big to fail. Moral hazard. Oh, maybe we've underwritten them for too long. In this case, you've got Netflix, too big to fail, and Coots, which is into Netflix, lending in the millions and millions and millions, is a model that's very expensive for producers. So the idea that somehow it's become more efficient, and everyone's facing the same way in the same value system, and everyone wants it cheaper, no, they want it cheaper for them. Not necessarily cheaper or more efficient, but it's their model that dictates how film financing is working. Yeah? Or indeed, long-running drama series quite often. Now, if you're a big star, and Ted Sarandos has wined and dined you, and you're Alfonso Cuarón, you may well find that that works, and if you're Guillermo del Toro, it works, blah, 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 whatever. But if you're the rest of us, nah, here's the piece of paper. It's 3 or 4 years of borrowing to be able to make it work. And producers have, over the last 2 or 3 years, have gone, Angus, that can't be true. That is precisely what the model is. Yeah? So if you learned something outside AI today, that's the one. Okay? There you go. Interesting this, because what actually is beginning to happen is that people who want certain types of experiences, people who want live events, people who can afford to go to live events, and we all know what it's like to go and see a live, mega famous pop group, yeah, or rock group, yeah? We all know how much those tickets cost. We all know that there's dynamic pricing, which means you're going to get screwed, et cetera, yeah? What's really interesting in terms of the economics from Moody's is 10% of the earners now account for half of all the spending on entertainment. Don't worry. I feel your pain. She was yawning very widely. Don't worry. It's fine. I also hate those top 10% earners. Oh, yeah. Don't worry. The lowest 20%, yeah, 20% to 40, 40 to 60, all of that lot, what's really interesting is they are price sensitive when it comes to paying for subscriptions. So they're getting the advertising loaded models, the freemiums, the YouTubes, the Netflix model, which now includes advertising, etc. Yeah? So what's actually happening is mass media is now being redefined by economics. The challenge of growth in our 21st century is an unequal economy. Yeah? It used to be about reach, where I started, Queen. Do you remember? Content's king, reach is queen. Yeah? Ads and share. Yeah? TV and cable and film was all about audience numbers. Do you remember we used to have all the ratings? Oh, what was the big show this week? Yeah? There was no dynamic pricing. Movie tickets, for example, have always cost the same, wherever you are. Yeah? You don't pay more to see Tom Cruise than you do to see a small, world cinema film made for maybe 10% of the budget, maybe 1% of the budget. Yeah? But if growth is broad, everyone can watch, and you can hike the prices of advertising, etc., we now have a very different kind of economy. Where's the mass audience now? Here. Insta. YouTube. Yeah? TikTok. That's where the mass audience is. Yeah? That's where the micro dramas of tomorrow are. Yeah? Gripping. Yes. Telenovelas that you just can't put down. Yeah. But that is where the mass audience is. Yeah? So, the majority watch for free, and the minority pay a premium. It's called soaking the rich. Back to my Marxist, background. Yeah. Very hard to grow and expand that market because it's high-end and it's niche. And of course, we live in a world, as I pointed out this morning, of growing inequality. Yeah. A very few number of people around the world own more than half of it. Literally, today, yeah? And of course, superfans are not keen on big prices and can only select a few concerts or special events to go to, yeah? So ultimately, the mass audience gets worse content, an awful lot of slop, and a lot of ads. Go figure from what I've just shown you, yeah? Exactly. The economic winners, the top 10%, have got even more to spend, and the rest do not. So they get remakes, leftovers, etc. And of course, they also get interrupted a lot, which of course no one loves when we're watching. It's almost like an affront, because we got seduced by Netflix and by our subscriptions, and then suddenly you watch something else that's got advertising, you're like, oh my God, and also it's the same ad. And you're like, oh my God, I've got to watch it, and it's the same ad again and again, because I haven't even worked out how to program ads, interestingly. Talk about the majority getting a shit deal. It really is a crap deal. Yeah. But, and there is a but. When I started teaching at Cambridge about 15 years ago, I was quite nervous. I felt I sort of had imposter syndrome, that awful feeling that you're the kind of person in the wrong place and you'll get found out. And what was really interesting is I suddenly realized quite quickly that smart people who've worked a little bit in business and decide to do an MBA are having an early midlife crisis. They go to do an MBA because they're not quite sure whether the career is on right track, whether they've made the right decisions, whether they feel they can add up and understand balance sheets and finance. It reminds me of a quote from David Putnam, the producer I mentioned this morning, when he said, very memorably back in the 1980s, to a huge British audience, the BFI, the problem with British producers is they can't read scripts and they can't add up. That did not go down well. That really was hated for many years. Yeah. But what is interesting here is authenticity. And when I say authentic, you know that feeling of our gut that tells us something's real, something's valuable, something's alerting us, something's resonant, yeah? Something's genuinely shifting us in terms of our feelings and opinion or our view or our sensibility. That is really interesting because what I'm seeing in the research is that Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and in particular the screen generation, are possibly beginning to say enough. Enough. We don't love AI slop. We've got too much to choose from. There's a lot going on that's distracting and spectacle. There's a dearth of relevant subjects and stories. Adolescence was almost by luck. When I asked my boys how authentic it was, they were like, yep, and it's really happening, Dad. Incel's true. They got it right. All those shots of all those teenagers walking out of school on their phone like this. Yep, Dad, that's it. That's exactly what it's like. No one talks to anyone else. Everyone's texting. Everyone's on these different kind of groups. And the cyberbullying is huge. It used to be physical in my day. I remember Michael Clark, at 6 years old, punching me in the face, and I was down on the floor, whipped to hospital. See, we don't forget. Long memories. Yeah. What would have happened today? I probably had a fake, naked photograph of me posted up on some website, doing something terrible to someone else, all completely fake. The hate's the same, but the treatment's different. Yeah? There you go. I think events matter. Events, dear boy. Events. Live and online, they matter. The bringing together of us, that campfire analogy I gave you of telling stories in the dark. That sense of community, that sense of understanding together how the world works, yeah? These matter, yeah? Old and incumbent media do actually matter. Legacy media still has certain values, even if it's being sued, yeah? And, most importantly, the desire for fresh, alerting, challenging content. There are signs, and there are certainly people who are talking about this at much younger age scales, of a resistance and a sense when I hear my kids turn around and say, Dad, it's not Netflix, it's shitflix. You start to think, where's that coming from? Yeah? Interesting. The resistance, almost sounding like a political movement. The resistance movement may start to embrace authenticity somewhat more. Okay, we talked about this, but it's worth reminding you, as I've learned from teaching and training, this to me is a real shocking fact. And Charlotte, yes, this one's carefully FT imperva. 51% of all internet traffic has been driven by bots for the first time. Which is why I was pointing out to you the danger of algorithms and AI machines gathering data that's been created by algorithms and machines. Now you see what we mean by filter world. Is this really what we're doing, or is this what actually is playing out in a digital near landscape? Yeah? How do we build systems where authenticity and curation coexist with that word again, support? Yeah? I've had a lot of arguments, as you can imagine, with academics about algorithms. And I've taught recently in Denmark at the Danish National Film and TV School. And one of the curators, a very smart guy from Estonia, who's what we call a creative technologist, always a really interesting oxymoron, that, where he's got very upset with me when I explained on these types of arguments that I actually think the algorithms are deeply dangerous. He said, no, they're great. They're fascinating. They're efficient. I'm not so sure. Yeah? So, is this the end of a 120-year hegemony? The studio system, the genius of the system, Is it sunset for Sunset Boulevard? Is this the death of Hollywood? Yeah? Interesting. Now, if I had said that to the European Commission some 28, 30 years ago, when I was talking about the problems that European cinema were facing, they said, God, bring on the demise of Hollywood. Bring it on. We would be very happy to see Hollywood burn. You know? I can just hear them. Oh, yes. But think what this means in terms of who is making and who is breaking boundaries, who is creating the myths, the stories that we share, yeah, the pipe dreams. We have got to the point of death by Marvel. Even the algorithms agree on that. They're very down on Marvel, yeah. And yet they seem to be very up on some other very old tracks like Batman. So God knows what the algorithms are searching. Who knows, because they've been driven by certain types of human biases as well. Because the internet, after all, is a record of all our crap of the last 25, 30 years. And that is what the machines have been trained on. Yeah? Nowhere to hide. This is all us, except it's a certain type of us. Dated, regurgitated, mashed up, yeah? Tricky. The death of Hollywood is an interesting one in terms of also the death of the movie star. Do you remember the years of glamour, of red carpets when it really meant something to see a movie star in real life? All those magazines, all those front covers, that dream of people who are larger than life on a screen, who are giving something of themselves in terms of generosity of performance and openness when actually in front of a camera, invaded by the camera. It's an invasive experience. Now, we see so many shows where we don't know anyone in them. Yeah? Happens to all of us. We're sitting watching stuff, whether it's Disney, mostly Netflix, whatever it is, Hulu, Disney Plus, whatever it is, yeah? The glamour and the importance of the cinema, we keep being told is over, that cinemas won't survive. Does anyone think that the cinemas will be dead in 15 years' time? Hands up. Do you think we're going to have no cinemas left and that the business will be overtaken by algorithms and data and online material? No, good. You're on the fence. Let's get you off the fence. What do you think? It's not looking good, Angus. It's not looking good. I'll go and change if you like. Yeah. It is a challenge. It's a huge challenge. It's a massive challenge. Some of it, interestingly, when you read all the trade magazines, as I do every day, you hear a large amount of people come back and say, if only the movies were better. People will go and see great films. So something's going on in terms of curation and space and events and the way that cinemas operate. Yes, it is a challenge. And yet, those moments when you do go to see a film in that dark cathedral of entertainment with the lights down and that larger-than-life screen in front of you flickering, and that shared experience of feeling the same pain or the same moment of joy when you laugh or cry in that huge room shared, that is a unique experience. That's got nothing to do with watching adolescents on your phone on a train, yeah? It's a different experience, yeah? So the question then comes down to some other things that we don't talk about. Education. Education. What happens when we're trying to excite or instill some sense of opportunity and joy about the experience of going to see films? I was thinking on my way here this morning when I walked from my hotel for about 25 minutes, I was thinking, what was the very first film I saw as a little boy? Jungle Book. I'm the king of the swingers, man, the jungle VIP. You see, I can still remember the words. I've reached the top and I've had to stop, and that's what's bothering me. Yeah? Fascinating, 6 years old. And I remember the intensity of the color, the magic of the experience, yeah? And I think back to that, and I think of what children do sometimes experience when they go to the cinema in a shared experience, that joy, that opening up of our worlds, our minds, our imagination. It's a very powerful experience. Question is, not can we protect it, but can we enhance it? Can we help find ways where some of this technology that we've been talking about so far is supportive in a good dynamic way, rather than a race to digital abyss and the bottom? These things are really important. They matter. Yeah. So, we're going to have a break. We're a little bit early, which is good. That's nice for you. It's good for me.